everybody, and welcome to another edition of In Pit Lane. The winter hibernation is finally coming to an end. Yes, this is the last week that we'll be doing the program from beyond the suburban curtain. Next week, I'm very happy to say that we'll be back in the studios of RMI TV Student Television in the heart of Grand Prix City, Melbourne, for a new series of In Pit Lane Live. We'll have Doc alongside me once again. We'll have guests. We'll have music. In fact, our guest next week coming up is Trans Am driver Elliot Barber. The Trans Am cars, or TA2, they've become really popular, and they've become probably the main attraction for the Shannon Speed Series, which is coming to Sandown in a couple of weeks' time. So Elliot will be joining us next week to talk all about that. Also, we'll have music and all sorts of things as well. So be tuned to that at the regular time, Thursday night, 9 o'clock here on Channel 31. But look, I'd love to say it's been a busy weekend in motorsport. Quite frankly, it hasn't. We were down at Phillip Island. I'll tell you what we saw at Phillip Island. We saw Superkarts. It was the National Festival of Superkarts, and they had a fantastic field, and we're going to catch up with some of the guys from Superkarts a little bit later on in the program, find out a bit more about the category and where it stands at the moment. Also down there, and this was a big surprise, there were Formula 5000. There were only 5 Formula 5000s, but one of them was the famous Mildren Chef, and it's a car with a fascinating history, a fascinating Le Mans connection. You'll find out more about that a little bit later on in the program as well. But right now, look, let's not dawdle any longer. Let's not put off the inevitable. We've got to do it sometime. Let's have a look at what has been happening on a quiet weekend of news on the In Pit Lane Motorsport News. Brad Keselowski celebrated his return from his NASCAR outing in the United States with a dominant performance to win the Supercar round at the Bend in South Australia last weekend. It was also a good weekend for Tickford racing driver Thomas Randall, who scored 2 podiums for the weekend, taking a second place and 2/3 in his best weekend in supercars. Cam Waters was second in the second race, while Chaz Mostert led home Randall in the third race as the Mustangs had a better performance, showing that perhaps parity issues might finally be a thing of the past. Management at the Bend claimed a total attendance of 41,237 for the event and are hoping to stay on the calendar for 2024. Their case may be helped by the possibility that the opening round of the series on the streets of Newcastle next year might not go ahead. A survey by the local council shows that a majority of local residents are opposed to a new deal for the Newcastle 500. The online survey, which was conducted by KPMG during March and April, found that only 37% of Newcastle residents supported the decision for Newcastle to continue to host the event. Businesses in the area were far more supportive, with 59% of phone respondents and 48% of online respondents keen to see the race continue. However, there have already been concerns from both sides of the argument as to the accuracy of the survey, with reports of people filling out multiple responses and entering fake details online. Local state MP Tim Crankenthorpe, that's a name, Tim Crankenthorpe, who was previously in support of the event, has now come out and backed residents' opposition. The majority of respondents have indicated that they do not want the Supercars event being held in the city, and I will be supporting that view when communicating with the New South Wales government, he said. Before he communicates with the New South Wales government, Mr Crankenthorpe has to communicate with the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission up there as well. New South Wales politicians, the best that money can buy. Well, better news for Supercars on the calendar front, though, with confirmation that Taupo in New Zealand will host a round next year. After reaching an agreement with the government via the Major Events Fund, Supercars has announced that Taupo International Motorsport Park will be the new home of the class in New Zealand for at least the next 3 years. The event will use the 3.32-kilometre international circuit configuration of the track. Apart from calendars, the main source of faux excitement in the world of supercars is the frenetic driver market, with more swapping than the swingers party in Hoppers Crossing. Don't ask me how I know about that. The move of Shane Van Gisbergen to NASCAR next year has set off a chain reaction that Oppenheimer would be proud of. Will Brown is leaving Erebus to replace Van Gisbergen at Triple Eight, with Jack LeBrock leaving Max Stone Racing to replace Brown. David Reynolds is out at Grove Racing to be replaced by Richie Stanaway, who'll be bringing some lovely Boost Mobile sponsorship money along from his one-man fan club, Boost Mobile CEO Peter Adderton. Both Grove and Boost say that the sponsorship played no part at all in the signing. Nick Percat's looking for a drive, with news that he's out at Walkinshaw Andretti United, almost certainly to be replaced by yet another young New Zealand driver in Ryan Wood, who incidentally is also backed by some big New Zealand sponsorship dollars. Scott Pye is expected to be leaving Team 18, replaced perhaps by David Reynolds, and we haven't even begun to talk about Tickford Racing or Brad Jones Racing or Blanchard Racing or anybody else yet, and nor do we intend to. Well, it's been a quiet weekend on track both here and in Europe. There was DTM at the Lausitzring, MotoGP in Austria, and NASCAR continued its road racing season, racing at Watkins Glen. And that's where we kick off this week's In Pit Lane International Wrap. Hendrick Motorsport's William Byron has won his first ever road course race with a commanding victory at the famous Watkins Glen circuit on Sunday. Byron entered the race after 4 previous oval track season wins and took advantage of a pit stop at the end of stage 1 to beat home Denny Hamlin and the informed Christopher Bell. Further down the field, Brad Keselowski and Kevin Harvick clinched post-season playoff spots by way of points. Bubba Wallace also had a good day at the Glen, earning stage points in each of the opening 2 stages and finishing in P12. This keeps him just above Ty Gibbs and Daniel Suarez, who need to win at Daytona next weekend to have any chance of making the playoffs. Defending funny car world champion Ron Capps moved into the points lead and picked up his 75th career win on Sunday at Brainerd International Raceway, powering past Robert Hight in the final round of the 41st annual Lucas Oil Nationals. Andron Brown returned to the winner's circle with a win over Leah Pruitt in the Top Fuel final to stay in contention for the championship. The dominant season continued for Dallas Glenn in Pro Stock as the points leader won for the 4th time in 2023 with a win over his KB Titan Racing teammate Kyle Kerensky in the final round. And in Pro Mod, Jason Lee earned his first career victory in the NHRA, picking up the win over Jason Scruggs and taking the championship points lead. Jack Aitken won his maiden DTM victory in the Saturday race at the Lausitzring to become the series' 9th different winner this year. The Emil Fry Racing Ferrari 296 crossed the line with a margin of just over 2 seconds ahead of Mirko Bortolotti's Lamborghini Huracan. In Sunday's race, Bortolotti took a thrilling win over Ricardo Fella's Audi R8 to become the series' first repeat winner of the season. Lucas Stoltz took 3rd place, driving the Team HRT Mercedes AMG. Bortolotti now leads the championship with 138 points, overtaking previous leader Thomas Preining by only 7 points. You're watching In Pit Lane, the Winter Hibernation Edition, the final edition for the winter, coming to you from beyond the suburban curtain here at the In Pit Lane corporate headquarters, overlooking the shores of beautiful Lake Geneva. But next week, of course, we're back in the studio, and right after the break, we're going to take you down to Phillip Island, speaking about natural beauties, and we're going to catch up with a fascinating Formula 5000, which we haven't seen much of in Australia. In fact, we haven't seen much of it over the week. Welcome back to In Pit Lane. Well, last weekend we were down at Phillip Island for the PIARC August Access event. These are really interesting events that they hold during the year. They provide an opportunity for racers who normally wouldn't get the opportunity to have a sort of full race series behind them, even at the state level. So I suppose it's sort of one level down from there. But they had a fascinating card on the weekend, which included, amongst other things, the National Festival of Superkarts. More on that later. But also a couple of races for Formula 5000. And one of the cars that was down there was the car we wanted to do a story on for quite some time. It's the Mildren Chef, a car that Kevin Bartlett drove very briefly back in the early 1970s. But it's a car with a fascinating history. In fact, it's far more fascinating than I knew about, as we find out when we talk to the people, Malcolm Osler, the driver, and also Matthew Field, the owner of the Mildren Chef Formula 5000.
Alec Mildren was a race car driver, famous Australian race car driver. He owned dealerships, I think mostly selling Alfa Romeos. Raced a lot of Alfas back in the 60s, and then started his own race team with Formula cars. This car here is known as the Mildren Chef, in Australia. It had a few different names overseas, but it started off in the workshops of Alan Mann Racing, where they were doing the Ford Le Mans program, and that program was shelved by Ford. Alan Mann Racing closed down, and Frank Gardner, for a period of about 12 months, set his own business up, which was called Motor Racing Developments, and they used a lot of the parts left over from these Le Mans cars and used it to build this Formula 5000 car. Gardner then tested it, but then he signed a deal with Lola and was therefore unable to drive it, so that's when he decided to try and sell the thing. There's info on the internet about it turning up at Palliser Cars. I did speak to the owners of Palliser Cars, and I do remember one of their comments was that it was far too technical for them. It was a monocoque and they were into space frames. But they do remember the car, and they do remember Gardner bringing it out and testing it at Silverstone for them. There's a couple of photos kicking around outside the Palliser factory of this car, and in those photos it's got a Ford engine in it. The common story about that one was it was the Ford engine out of Gardner's Mustang that he used to run. By the time Gardner sold it to Mildren, he'd fitted it with the Chev engine that's in it now, and it came out to Australia and turned up at the 1970 Australian Grand Prix. It was the first time anyone had seen the car. The paperwork I've got on the car, it only arrived about 2 weeks prior to that, and ran at the Grand Prix there. It ran, I think the best result it achieved was a 4th place. Had niggly mechanical issues. Didn't have that good a reputation. Was always sort of down midfield kind of thing. It only ran one season of the Tasman series, it ran 7 rounds, which some of them were in Australia and some of them were in New Zealand. That was with Bartlett driving. A couple, as I said, I think 4th was about the best he got in that. There's a few other places further down the field and a couple of breakdowns. Then the last time Bartlett ran it was at Surfers Paradise, where he damaged it in qualifying and didn't actually run. And that was the last time Bartlett ran it. It was then sold to another well-known Australian motorsport guy, was Jack Wortmeyer, and he had a driver named Errol Richardson who drove it around at Warwick Farm in '74. Tasman ran Warwick Farm '74, and again in early '75 he drove it at Oran Park, and that was the last time it ran as a Formula 5000. It did a few hill climb events, and then it got parked in a shed.
So how did you end up with the car?
I was mates with Errol Richardson. This is the story how I ended up with the car. I was mates with Errol Richardson, and he kept telling me about the car, and the daughter of Jack Wortmeyer had it in her garage and was just sitting on it. She wasn't doing anything with it, but didn't really want to get rid of it. So Errol just kept chasing it over the years, and eventually, she decided to let the car go. It had been, by the time I got it, had been sitting for, I think it was 36 or 37 years, just in a garage with stuff piled up on it and bits missing off it and that kind of thing. So eventually I acquired the car and got it back to my workshop, and it needed a full restoration. It was stripped down, every nut, bolt, rivet, everything came out of it. The whole lot was refurbed. It went back together with the original engine in it. It's got a Bart's Chevrolet in it, and that's not what's running it now, but that's the original engine. Went back in it, and we did run it with that. It had lots of spares that came with it, very sort of exclusive spares, I suppose. They're all parts off these Ford Le Mans cars, as far as wheels and uprights and that kind of stuff. It took about, it was about 9 months to restore it. It looked finished, and then I had some other things come up in my life, so I just didn't get back to it. And because I'm mates with Malcolm Osler, he was looking around for a car, and so we decided he'd take the thing and get it up and running and campaign the car. So that's where we're at now.
When I was a 16-year-old kid going out to Oran Park in 1970 or whatever, and seeing these guys running around in these chariots, if you told me I was going to drive one day, I wouldn't have believed you. So it's a great privilege.
So what about the car's history? We spoke about about Alex Mildren's place in Australian motorsport, but the car was in fact driven, of course, by Kevin Bartlett.
Yep.
I mean, if for no other reason, it's very significant for that, isn't it?
Lovely bit of provenance. If you look at the background of the car with what went on in the UK and the season it did, and Australian Grand Prix, and quite a significant bit of motor racing history. The thing that defines it has got more grunt than grip. So you're really playing with the throttle the whole time, even around some of the corners. Some of the straights that have got bends in them are now corners in this car, whereas in everything else they're flat. So it keeps you on your toes.
What about the importance of keeping these cars out on the track? I mean, we're seeing increasingly, I was talking to somebody from Historic Racing just recently, and they said it was getting increasingly hard to get fields together because a lot of business people are now buying these cars as investments, and they're locking them away in sheds or museums, and they're not bringing them out again. How important is it that we do see them out on the track where they belong?
That is where they belong, and therefore it's important. I hope they keep coming to the track. Otherwise, if people don't bring them to the track, people won't put races on for them, and you won't be able to bring them to the track. We'll just have to look at it in the shed. Saying that, large part of bringing the car here, or to the big historic meetings, is actually having it in the garage, and people come around. They love to see it, they admire it, and want to know the history. It's all part of the event, really.
After the break, as we said, we were down at Phillip Island. We saw the National Festival of Supercars. They had a fabulous field of all categories down there, and we're going to find out more about that when we return to In Pit Lane right after this break. So don't go away. We'll be right back. They exist in the Twilight Zone, somewhere between sprint kart racing and full-scale motorsport. Superkarts don't have the profile of some other motorsport formula, and they certainly don't have the money of top-level sprint kart racing. But if there was a mathematical equation for the ratio of funds invested to outright speed, then nothing would come close.
Phillip Island, the lap record here is 1:28. So I think you'll find MotoGP and V8 Supercars are within a second of that either way. I'm not sure how close we are. They go into turn one in the dry, full noise on the throttle at 250 kilometres an hour. So they're fast. No seatbelts, no hands device, no roll coach.
Well, basically when we come out of MG corner, we're flat all the way until turn two. So yeah, flat round turn one at 240 odd kilometres an hour. Almost flat over Lukey Heights, just sort of back off a little bit. So pretty quick around the corners. I think that's where they get their lap times from, for sure.
The National Festival of Supercars was held at Phillip Island and attracted competitors from all over Australia.
It's an event that we set up 10 years ago when CAMS were saying that we should have no Australian Championship, and we wanted to do an event that everyone wanted to come to. So we've been doing it for that long. It's grown, it's been up and down with COVID. We had 68 entrants this year. I think we're 10 short of our highest. And this is also the second round of the ASE Australian Championship that we're running for Supercars this year.
So when you say we're running, who is we?
The sport itself. So Superkarts as a sport have taken it upon themselves to run a championship for all the states for our 1, 2 and 3 in Australia. So, and the National Festival is round 2 of that this year. But the National Festival is a standalone event and has been a success for 10 years or more. We think we sit in regular motorsport. We race at the regular tracks. We don't race at sprint kart tracks. So we are the obvious successor or lead up to cars, supercars or Formula One, more so I would think than sprint. But that's our opinion as supercarters, mainly because we have a CAMS licence or Motorsport Australia licence. We have we race at the circuits that all the cars race at. We hold lap records that are faster at some circuits than a V8 supercar. So you would think that we would be the natural progression for people to go through and learn these circuits from a young age. At the moment, superkarting is in a bit of a problem because Motorsport Australia changed our junior age levels and got rid of our junior licence, so we're trying to get that back to get some more young kids in the sport, but at the moment it's 14 and up.
Racing was held over 2 days with races for 3 different class groups.
Well, the 3 categories are broken up into, one is non-gearbox, which is non-gearbox light, heavy and now super heavy. So that's just weight divisions. They've all got the same motor, the same sort of chassis, same tyres and everything. It's a controlled class. The second group is 125 open gearbox karts and a stock Honda controlled class. So they're 125 as well. So they run in the second group, and the third group is our premier group, which is 250 International, and then one step down is a 250 single engine, which is called 250 National. So there's 7 classes across supercars.
Conditions were, as is usual for Phillip Island, tricky. But despite the challenges of the wind, the rain and the Cape Barren geese, the track seems ideal for this kind of racing.
Mate, there's nothing quite like it. It's one of the most beautiful places to go racing. The circuit's immaculate. It's perfect size for us. You can fit 5 of us, 6 of us wide down the straight. It's absolutely brilliant.
The Formula One of superkart racing are the 250 Internationals. This kart of Matthew Bass is typical of the top level in the sport right now.
The chassis is an Anderson Maverick, so that's from the UK. And the engine is a VM250, which is actually from the Czech Republic, which seems to be one of the more popular engines at the moment. The chassis definitely is one of the more popular ones that most people run. Yeah, there's a few other ones out there, but that's the sort of the most popular one.
And what's it like to drive one around Phillip Island?
It's crazy. Just the corner speeds, everything. And you feel every bump too. You feel every bump. You feel every G-force. There's no suspension, very little seat padding, so you feel everything. But it's definitely a thrill.
As constant as the infamous Phillip Island wind is the sense of community within the sport. The rivalry's on track, but back in the paddock, there's a strong sense of mutual respect and support.
We're always happy to help new members come into the sport. We're happy to find them some second-hand karts to start. There's plenty of karts around, and plenty of people to help them in every class. This is not like Sprint. Superkarts we will share all day, help you out with your settings and all the rest of it. Sprint seems to be, in karting, seems to be a little bit more, hold it close to your chest. They don't like to tell you about it. But very warm atmosphere in superkarting, very family-orientated atmosphere, and you'll always find plenty of kids running around the track.
Everyone helps each other. It makes it a whole lot easier to go racing. Yeah, so it's very good.
Me personally, I just like the weekends away. All the supercars are good people. It's just good fun catching up with good people.
Superkart racing takes a special type of commitment. The speeds are high, but for those people looking for supercar speed on a realistic budget, nothing else even comes close. Thank you for joining us over the past 12 weeks or so. Really do appreciate you hanging around. We've had a lot of people, as have been out and about, a lot of people have come up and said that they've been watching the show and they've enjoyed it. So thank you very much for your support. Really do appreciate it. Thank you very much once again to our sponsor, Online Invent, who have been fantastic. And the great news is Online Invent are going to rejoin us for the new series of In Pit Lane starting next week, and we thank you very much for that. Look forward to seeing you next week, and we've got a whole new crew and a whole new bunch of people coming in, so really looking forward to it. That's next week, 9 o'clock Thursday night on Channel 31 from the studios of RMI TV in the heart of Grand Prix City, Melbourne. But until we see you again right then, from all of us here, me, bye for now.